I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of TGU, the Governance Update, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association with the much appreciated sponsorship of Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. And in breaking news this week, I am not Chris Eddy. Chris is away on international assignment, and I'm Steve Cooper, really pleased to be here. And to cover off on all of that, we've got the A-team with us, and welcome first to Julie Reid. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Steve. Oh, it's so exciting to have you here this week. And I know we will miss Chris, but you know, you're sort of in that league of Chris, and we really appreciate you being here today and getting us through what is always such a busy week in local government. So great to see you, Steve.
Oh no, absolute pleasure to be invited to do this, Julie, and they are big shoes to fill. Or maybe I could even say big sea boots to fill without giving away where Chris might be on his international assignment. Anyway, we'll let people guess on that. And also welcome Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Hi, Tony.
Oh, great to have you on board. Stepping in as captain of this sort of motley crew of sailors, the three of us here, Chris. Steve, sorry, I'm calling you Chris because I'm just so used to that incredible presenter in Chris, but I'm excited to have you back, Steve. It's been a while since we've seen you on TGU, and I know a lot of our regular viewers ask about you, and we'll be pretty excited to see you back.
Actually, thanks, Tony. And I probably should address that elephant in the room and just say for people that, without going into too much detail, I had some change in family circumstance that meant I've needed to step back into a carer role, and so very much missed the time with the VLGA. And I would just say, coming up to the end of financial year, if anyone's got some spare cash, then they're needing to make a tax-deductible donation. That Dementia Australia is a fabulous charity that does terrific work, so maybe people should consider that. Okay, so let's move onwards and upwards and see about what's happened this week. There's been a few submissions closed. Submissions closed for the panel of administrators and monitors for local government Victoria, and we just note that that's happened and wait to see a panel presumably announced. The other thing is that submissions on the conduct guidelines were also closed this week. And Tony, I understand you spoke at the VLGA's Governance Advisory Network last Friday. I've heard glowing reports.
No, it was a great turnout of mainly sort of mayors and deputy mayors that came along to that one. And I spoke the day before at the LG Pro webinar on this local government reforms 2024 as well, Chris and Julie. And yeah, really great to just obviously get some sector feedback because the consultation period, as you say, closed this week. Interesting, I think generally a lot of support for the notion of mandatory ongoing training for councillors and mayors. I guess we're sort of hoping perhaps for a few tweaks in the final provisions, that 3-month time frame rather than the current 6. The 3-month time frame for your mandatory induction training might be a bit tight with Christmas and that in there, and maybe the tweak is an extra month or so for councils. Probably also there's, to be fair, a few concerns in the sector about withholding councillor allowances until they've completed the induction. There may be some councillors really relying on those allowances coming in the first couple of months to really help them get by. The new notion of a standard councillor code of conduct generally accepted, but what does this language "and other governance matters to be prescribed in the regulations" mean? Are we going to get a standard set of governance rules, transparency policies, sort of a la Operation Sandon? Yeah, probably the one for me that I think attracts most of the controversy, and I find perhaps the most challenging, is this proposal around the ability of the minister to suspend or disqualify an individual councillor, and potentially suspending a councillor for up to 12 months. And there's mixed views in the sector. I think on the one hand, there's an appreciation that sometimes it's one individual on a council that can be problematic and suck a lot of the energy out and be distracting, and having this ability for a minister to step in and deal with an individual councillor as opposed to having to, dismiss a whole council might be valuable. But on the other hand, there's the, kind of anti-democratic nature of that, and, one arm of government dismissing another arm, but also with the move to largely single member wards. If, you're in, Smith ward and you're the councillor for that ward and you're suspended for 8, 9, 10, 12 months, how are your constituents going to go in terms of representation in the meantime? So certainly entities like VLGA, LG Pro, MAV will have put their responses in, and we anticipate that the government will be looking at those, and we understand these reforms are likely to be in the House by about March. So we may well see these sort of, in terms of draft legislation or regulations in the near term.
Yeah.
Well done, Tony. Take a bow. That is fantastic. Well done to you to bring all that together and to talk to the sector and get their views around that.
Well,
Interesting point that you made, and Steve, you might sort of agree with this. You know how you talked about how some councils might rely on, getting the payment in. I think it's probably less for councillors, but particularly for mayors and deputy mayors, or mayors in particular, who are now giving up their full-time jobs. Because it's a full-time role now being a mayor, pretty much, So for them to give up their full-time job and then have, a gap between then and their allowance coming in is quite hard for, particularly, I think, for the mayors. So, it'll be interesting to see where they go with all the on that, and how much, it'd be interesting to see how much division there is within the local government community on some of these issues.
Yeah, really, really was great to hear the feedback. What my idea around that issue of allowances is, well, you might find that your allowance might be suspended if you haven't done the training within the mandatory period, but it certainly gets paid initially as if you're about to do, you will comply. That would, for me, to seem a bit more equitable. There's another issue around equity with this notion of removing the right to an indemnity for councillors for legal costs in relation to councillor conduct panel matters. Part of the reasoning is that there's a delay often in a councillor conduct process while a councillor goes off to, the insurer, the council's insurer, and says, can we get an indemnity? And everything's sort of put on hold for a while. But removing that indemnity, what it means is that the councillors with financial means are still going to be able to access lawyers, and the councillors without aren't. So I guess it's a kind of a reflection of where the community's at the moment, generally in terms of the law. People have got money are advantaged. But I also see it's probably going to throw a bit of additional expectation on councillor conduct officers at councils, governance officers. I'm not entitled to an indemnity for a lawyer, so can you please help me draft my application, my response? Where do council officers sit with that? It might be nice to get a little bit of clarity. The other one is around during a suspension period. Could we get some clarity on what that means? Obviously, you can't go to a council meeting, but can you call for, public to be, contacting you on your social media on council issues? Can you go along to, events in your municipality as a councillor? Or must you, fold your cards and cease holding yourself out to be a councillor doing anything in relation to council work during that suspension period?
I've got a lot of faith in the staff at LGV, and they'll be thinking about those kind of things, hopefully. I mean, I'm pretty sure they will be. You know, what's the practical, application of some of these controls? So, they're very skilled governance people. So let's, it's good that you're mentioning it, but I'm sure that they're thinking about the sort of practical application behind the scenes. So it's really, really interesting. And Steve, I hear that there's been sort of people last minute putting in for these administrator monitor type roles. It's going to be really interesting to see who puts their name in the hat and who comes out at the other end. It's a potential 4-year commitment. Let's hope we get some really skilled people that really deeply understand local government, and this move towards having say 2 monitors come in rather than 1, I think is a very good idea, in the sense that you might get 2 different skill sets. We've discussed that before, that there's a benefit for the council. And I believe that time is shared. You're not paying double as a council for 2 people. The time is actually shared by those 2 monitors, which was good to hear. I sort of inquired about that, and that's the way it works. So it doesn't mean it's costing the council double, which I was pleased to hear about.
I'd agree, Julie, and hopefully too it will open up panels to people who on their own might not quite have the skill set to get them over the line. So it will be really interesting to see who comes out. So thank you for that. Look, we'll move on. The Victorian Electoral Commission social media has been just running wild lately, and I saw during the week that preliminary reports for Boroondara, Greater Dandenong and Cardinia Shire have been released on the ward boundary review. So that's the ward boundaries, not the overall structure. Any feedback, Tony or Julie, on those reviews?
Yeah, look, I think they'll be closely scrutinised, one would think. Both Boroondara and Greater Dandenong, the recommendation was, there were 2 models put out really for community consultation, but both involving some ward boundary changes, but maintaining those, 11 single councillor wards. I think in Cardinia there was just 1 single model chosen for community consultation, so that'll be interesting there. And again, that model involves some ward boundary changes, but maintaining that current 9 single councillor ward structure at Cardinia. So perhaps not so revolutionary, the changes in those recommended or currently out for consultation in those 3 municipalities, but still, I dare say there'll be a lot of scrutiny around, where ward boundaries ought to lie, and those sort of machinations around, where the appropriate boundary ought to be. Is it a road? Is it some natural feature? And do the communities sort of share a common interest?
Oh, I was just going to say that, and the councils know their areas really well. So that's the opportunity for them to then feed in, does this model work better than another model? They may even go back and say, well, neither of them work for us. This is what's going to work for us, which is interesting. I noticed too, Steve, I think there was something come out for Pyrenees as well this week in that same group. I don't know. I think it was maybe an update. I don't know whether it was the original report, but I think it was an update. But just recognising that Pyrenees is also, I think, in that latest batch of reports back.
All right.
Yeah, I think what they've done is they've put out the preliminary report for Pyrenees, but they've put back the determination time, for making a final decision. I think because there's some the 2 wards that need adjusting aren't sort of contiguous, so it means they've got to can't just adjust boundaries between wards. They've got to look at the entire municipality, so it's a bit more it has a larger impact. So I think they've decided they need a little bit more time for consideration on the Pyrenees one. But as you say, the plan's out there at the moment, the preliminary one.
Of course, Steve, I think they're going to need more time anyway because of the current situation we're in. So we might want to change tack and go into what's going on out at Pyrenees.
I know what you did then, Julian. We will actually, I think we should, it's quite right and proper that we talk about what's happening in Pyrenees. Just quickly to close out the VEC, I noticed also that South Gippsland, which we're going to talk about in a moment, the consultation time's been extended there. And I was just going to make an observation that with the 9 wards, it almost seems like, you know, you start by finding some quite neat boundaries for communities. And as you get to the other end of the municipality, to achieve the plus or minus population or voting numbers, that some of the boundaries become a little bit more unusual and maybe not quite reflecting communities of interest. And that's always really a tough one. But let's talk about Pyrenees, because our friends and colleagues, particularly to the west of the state in this last week, have had a dreadful time. And you know, our thoughts go out to Pyrenees Shire, Golden Plains, and it seemed like the Wimmera region dodged a bullet this time, but they've still got some warm weather coming up.
Yeah, just a whole community effort out there. We've mentioned, you know, it's the Pyrenees led by Jim Nolan there. The fire, I think it's called Bay and Dean. There near sort of Mount Cole, Langigaran State Park, been burning. We're burnt for about a week. I understand it's, you know, under control now finally, but and then sadly in Golden Plains out at sort of Derreel, we've learnt that this fire, 110 hectares, there's a suspicion that it was deliberately lit. So, you know, Eric Braslis and the team at Golden Plains, no doubt, that caused them you know, was a massive issue for them out there in Derreel. And to hear that, you know, potentially, or at least there's some suspicion of it having been deliberately lit, it's pretty sad.
Yeah.
It really brings back a lot of horrific memories for a lot of people. I don't know. I mean, Tony, you've lived in the country. Have you ever experienced
Black
this
Saturday?
firsthand?
Remember Black Saturday distinctly.
I remember being in school during Ash Wednesday fires up in the Dandenongs. You know, it's just, you know, everybody's got some kind of story to tell of, you know, their personal experience, I think, in these horrific events that local government managed so well. Just, you know, the stories that you hear of the heroics of staff within local government and these amazing emergency management people that just work so hard during these times to, you know, help the community. It's just, you know, this is the best bit, I reckon, about local government that always tugs on my heartstrings. But yeah, we reach out to them and sort of say, let us know if we can help you, you know, because you want to be able to help local government in circumstances like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, to that end, interestingly, on Monday, I got the chance to speak with Kerryn Ellis, the CEO at the South Gippsland Shire, about the storm events that they'd had, particularly in Mooted North a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was a really good opportunity to talk to Kerryn just informally around the approach and what they've learned so far. So what we'll do is throw to the interview with Kerryn, and we'll come back and discuss it shortly. Here's Kerryn Ellis. And as we said, welcome to Kerryn Ellis, Chief Executive of the South Gippsland Shire Council. Hi, Kerryn.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thrilled to be able to. And with the sort of amount of emergency activity going on, and we send our support to your community and those communities around Ararat and Avoca as well at the moment in particular, but it seemed too good an opportunity not to have a yarn with you about just some of your initial takeouts from the experience you've had recently at Mooted North.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for the well wishes. And I certainly support your comments about other parts of the state that have been impacted. It's been a really, really challenging couple of weeks. In fact, it's been a challenging year so far, and it's only February. Takeouts for me, we were impacted by the storm event a couple of Tuesdays ago. It was very, very significant across our shire. Mooted North in particular was very hard hit. But one of the interesting reflections that we've had in the organisation is that the impact across the rest of the Shire in any one of those townships would have normally been a really serious emergency response. And in one sense, a number of those communities really had to operate with a minimum of support because the impact in Mooted North was so significant that it really required a pretty a large effort from council and a very large effort from community volunteers and ultimately state agencies as well. So been a very, very big and very busy couple of weeks. And for me personally, the first time that I've been involved in emergency events of different scales, including the June 21 storm event when I was at South Gippsland. But this is the largest emergency event that I've ever been involved in.
So what's the status at the moment, Kerryn, in terms of particularly Merbu North, but the Shire more generally? And I know we talk about response and recovery, but it's never that clear.
No, it's not. We are still in the response stage at the moment and starting to move towards elements of recovery. And you're right that whilst those phases have clear definitions, they do overlap in reality. We have finally had power restored in Merbu North. The parts of that community were without power for 8 or 9 days. And we had almost 3 days where we didn't have mobile connectivity either, including a 48-hour period where we didn't even have access to Triple O, which is a pretty alarming set of circumstances for a community that was also isolated because of significant road closures as well.
Wow.
We've had 25 houses damaged, and of those, 17 are uninhabitable, which is obviously very serious for those individual families. But on top of that, a lot of damage to public infrastructure and even to our parks and rail trails and some of those community spaces that are normally where the community would come together in a difficult time like this. So council, our officers have been working very hard to try and at least make some of those spaces accessible in the first instance. And also working very hard to provide that immediate community support that's needed on the ground. One stage I had over 60% of my staff working on the emergency response, which was absolutely huge. And the team have done a great job, but it is a really significant effort. And for the Merbu North community, there is still a really long way to go with cleanup.
There's 2 questions that come to me out of that, Kerryn. One being the one about the transition for the organisation. Then after we talk about that, I'm interested in how you make decisions and set priorities. But I know you and I have talked before about the importance of an authorising environment and sort of clear lines of accountability. But an emergency sort of throws that up in the air by the insertion of a MERO and the whole emergency management responsibility. How does a staff group or an organisation transition to that emergency sort of structure without a structure, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if you'd asked me this maybe 18 months ago or even 2 years ago, I might not have been very clear on the answer. But South Gippsland was really significantly affected by the June 2021 storm events. And after that, we did a really comprehensive post-incident review. And one of the things that revealed, although we'd realised it through the emergency response, was that we needed a lot greater clarity in terms of authorising environment, who took up what role under what circumstances, and how that played out. But probably even more importantly for me, we actually needed to practice it so that it wasn't just a document where you had things written down, but we actually kind of had a go at it. And we've done that on 2 or 3 occasions since then, one of which was a full emergency response kind of scenario exercise, was only about 3 months ago. And I'm so grateful that we did it, because it's not just about the individual knowing what their role is and taking that on. It's about everybody else around them knowing that that's what that person's going to be doing. We've had an emergency event, they're going to be offline. My role might not be to respond to the emergency, but it might be to take up what that person would normally be doing with their time. And all of that happened really seamlessly. The organisation responded really, really well. We had a lot of people putting their hand up and saying, what can I do? I'm here, I'm ready to go, give me a job. And that was incredible. We've had our emergency response centre opened since the Wednesday, the day after the storm, which is almost 2 weeks now. And we've had it open 7 days a week. And that's been purely around members of staff saying, you know, I'm not directly involved in emergency management, but I'm happy to help. What can I do? And then the other thing I think is having that clarity around it is that's going to be directly involved in the emergency response, but just as importantly, who's not going to be. So
Yes.
that you still have the organisation is still functioning, and that you've still got people making decisions, progressing development of the budget, you know, answering normal customer inquiries, all the normal day-to-day things that councils need to do. So I would say practice and keep practicing, but it also relies really heavily on goodwill. And
Yep.
I think that's where, if people are talking emergency response often enough that they feel familiar and they're happy to jump into the roles they're assigned. If they haven't got a role assigned, they're happy to put their hand up and volunteer. That worked for us really well.
Kerryn, you've described carnage almost, like with what's occurred not just in Murray North but across the Shire. How are decisions made in terms of priorities? Who's doing that?
It's a really good question, and there probably are a handful of us that are making those decisions in terms of where we put, for a small rural council, very scarce resources in a really, really difficult set of circumstances for community. We do have our emergency group. We have a dedicated emergency management officer who's supported by a lot of very experienced senior people that jump into those temporary roles. And between us and in partnership with the executive, we've been making those decisions on the run. Initially, that was myself and my emergency management coordinator, and we sort of brought in a stronger structure around that in the coming 2 or 3 days. The thing to sort of bear in mind in the country is that quite often the people that are involved in the response will have been impacted as well. And I'm actually one of those people this time round. I was working all day and then going home to a house that had no power and no mobile phone, which I absolutely hated. I hated the feeling that I had staff out on the road and I couldn't be contacted. So we just all had to be a bit flexible and a bit patient with each other and make sure that people could look after themselves and their families too if they needed to. But we made a lot of, I think, really, really important decisions fairly quickly, and you need to be flexible enough and certain enough of your role that you can do that on the fly pretty well. And I, not by accident, have people in those emergency management roles that I very much trust their capability, and they're incredible. They managed to pull the resources together that we needed to provide a really solid community response.
Yeah, and presumably in that, Kerryn, there are things that don't go as well as you would have hoped and expectations not met.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. There are things where you give something a go and realise it's probably not the best way to proceed. There are things where you get the best advice, but you'll still have someone in the community that is outraged that that's the way that you've decided to go. And there are times where, you really need to call on those partners and key stakeholders that presumably most CEOs and most councils have in agencies right across their region. Because they will know more than you at certain aspects of what's happening in the emergency, and you really need that advice and need to know that those agencies will jump in and do the bit that they're expert at, which has been absolutely incredible in South Gippsland. It's worked incredibly well.
Yeah, again, and I presume leveraging off strong relationships just in business as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a strong advocate of building relationships in peacetime, because you don't want the first call that you ever make to your, regional executive director of RDV or, Department of Transport to be when you're in a disaster situation. And that has definitely worked for us. We've got very, very strong relationships with all of those regional partners and our regional councils too, right across Gippsland. And that support has been incredible. Volunteered with warmth and with care right from the moment that they knew we needed it.
Kerryn, what about moving back to your staff group? What were your key messages to them?
Key messages to the staff group initially were look after yourselves, look after your families, look after your homes. If you're impacted, we understand that that's challenging and that you're going to need to take some time. The second set of key messages were, if you're okay and you've got capacity, come into the office, because we didn't have any mobile connectivity, but we managed to get email up and running. Come into the office, we'll have jobs for you. I went in the next morning after sending that email, and there are 150 people in the office waiting for jobs, which was
fantastic,
amazing. And then the third part was, we've got this, we have a structure, it's well practiced, it's well rehearsed. The people who are leading this are well trained, they know what they're doing, and you know, whilst you can have confidence that that structure is working, you will also get the advice and support that you need if you're asked to go out and, you know, be present at the community response centre. You won't just be out there on your own. We're putting support structures around you.
What about this is a huge topic, the role of the mayor?
This is a great opportunity for me actually to give a shout out to Councillor Claire Williams, who is our mayor. She's the first time mayor and actually first time councillor too. And she's done an absolutely incredible job. It just so happens that Merbau North is part of her ward. So she has very strong connections in that community. And that's been an enormous asset to us. She's been very, very present on the ground, talking to community groups, outreach, putting people in touch with each other. You know, a lot of the emergency response has actually been led by the community itself. And our mayor's been a really active part of that, and she's made a lot of connections, which has worked really well. But the other thing that she's done, which is incredible, is I think in the last couple of weeks, we've met with the Premier and 9 different ministers. Some of them have come South Gippsland, others we went into Spring Street last week and met with, and the mayor has done an amazing job in a really human and very compassionate way, sharing the story of our communities, Merbau North in particular, making it really clear where we need support, but also, you know, engaging those ministers in a way that has enabled them to understand what's really happening on the ground. And I think they're really the key roles for the mayor in an emergency, to be the face of the council, engage with the community, engage with other tiers of government, and she's done an incredible job.
And I did say to you offline, I had met Councillor Williams before she was a councillor in the induction or the sort of the candidate phase, and it struck me that Councillor Williams' attributes of being really concerned about the accountabilities that go with the role would have carried her well in this emergency.
Very much so. And yeah, likewise, you know, there's really great information out there about the role of a mayor and the role of a councillor in an emergency, and it's a great starting point. But in an ideal world, the CEO and mayor will have a strong relationship that predates the emergency, and just work together to work out who's doing what and who's best placed to do what each day, because things change really fast.
I can imagine egos at the door, presumably, Kerryn.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about the role of councillors?
Similar to the mayor, but obviously not so much at the front and centre, particularly with the meetings with ministers and that sort of thing, but very much that face of council and that interface with the community. I mentioned earlier that whilst Merbau North was really significantly impacted, the vast majority of our Shire was without power, and some parts of the Shire were without power for longer than Merbau North in the end. And we really had our councillors out and about on the ground, playing that community liaison role. Some of them also had professional jobs that were related to community support, which they did incredibly well. The mayor and I certainly kept them up to date as to the in sort of acute response we were providing on the ground in Merbau North, but they did a terrific job right across the rest of our communities in providing support, sharing information, particularly where we had no mobile coverage. They were with staff out there sharing information in printed forms, you know, being present at community hubs and just being that interface. And again, I'd say that the councillors did a great job.
Yeah, and it's a really tough gig for the elected councillors, isn't it, to not have the authority to commit, but to perform that role.
Yeah. And for all of us, we often, what the community wanted to know was often information that we just didn't have. So playing that role of listening and being empathetic when you don't always exactly know the answer, it can be tough. But the councillors did a great job, and they certainly navigated that role between, you know, it's not their job to grab a chainsaw and be on the ground, but it's also not their job to sort of go, oh, well, you know, I've got no role to play here. So they were in that lovely middle ground of really being an interface with the community in a really supportive way.
We've talked about advocacy already, but along the way, presumably you're debriefing on a regular basis, and at some point at the end you'll do a monster debrief. What does that all look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do have, I mentioned before that we did a really significant post-incident review in 2021. I'm happy to say a lot of what we learnt through that review, we've not only implemented, but we've now effectively tested, and it's worked really well.
Yep.
But certainly there are things that either are still were an issue then and still are, or have emerged as an issue in a different way since.
Yep.
We're being really careful to capture those things as we go, because there is so much happening so quickly that it's really easy to get to 2 or 3 months down the track and you've sort of forgotten all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say the key thing is document it somewhere. Take photos, make a journal note, whatever it is, so that when the time comes where you do the more formal review, you've actually got that information available. But our emergency management team and also our teams that are out and about on the road are debriefing very regularly about how things are going and how they can improve their practices. And then we will schedule a more formal debrief. I was going to say at the end, it's hard to know when is actually the end, but there'll be a point at which even our community recovery goes into more of a business as usual stage.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point too, with a lot of these issues that, what people carry with them can last months and years. What would be your sort of key messages out of all of this?
Well, I think you've probably just touched on it actually, Steve, and this is for the community, but for council staff as well, just how important it is to prioritise self-care during emergencies. And to really make sure that people are taking some time to rest. The need out there on the ground far exceeds what we're able to provide by way of response, but the temptation is there. I see it amongst staff and I'm seeing it amongst community volunteers too, to just keep going because there's more I can do. But none of us are any good to anybody, including our families, but also our colleagues and our community, if we don't look after ourselves. I've worked really hard at trying to role model taking breaks myself, and I've also strongly encouraged our emergency management leaders to do that, because if they're not doing it, others will see that happening. But also, none of us make decisions that are as sound when we're tired, and maybe we don't have that same amount of empathy for an impacted community member when we're tired ourselves. So it is actually important in terms of performance that we do rest and we take time out. And I know everyone says it, but you kind of don't really realise how important it is until you're in it. And that would be my biggest takeout. My 2 things would be practice your emergency plan and make sure that you're building in and role modelling those opportunities to take a break.
What a useful couple of messages, Kerryn. I've probably taken you away from conveying those messages from your team for quite long enough, but I know the listenership of TGU are going to be vitally interested in what you've done, and as we started, really sending out good wishes to this community in South Gippsland, and particularly Mooted North. So, Kerryn, Ellis, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Steve.
So that was Kerryn Ellis. What a terrific set of takeaways. Tony, Julie, what were your first responses there on hearing that interview?
Oh, just I was taken aback that this at one stage, had 60% of the staff working on the emergency response. That's a massive thing, isn't it? And often some of those people involved, they're themselves personally affected. Kerryn talking about, herself not having mobile connectivity, but no doubt others sort of having damage into their houses and that. So, what a sort of a great sense of pulling together that occurred there.
Yeah, absolutely, Billy.
What resonated with me with what Kerryn said was about the care for the people, about how, she as a leader has to model taking a break, and this is what, leadership is all about, is about recognising what people need and understanding deeply, what is important to people. And, they can't continue to just operate 24 hours a day. They'll just collapse in a heap and they won't be able to function effectively. So good on Kerryn for role modelling that, and getting her emergency management people to role model that so people can rotate and take a break. But, the fact that she said that over 100 staff, stepped in when she said, if you can help out, come into work tomorrow. And even though a lot of them were affected personally, that they all came into the office and said, what job do you want me to do? That's remarkable. And again, probably just echoes what I'd said before about how dedicated staff are to making a difference in the community, and what a great community down at South Gippsland. I don't think I really appreciated the damage. I knew about Merbau North, but I didn't realise about the extent of the damage across the municipality.
No, same, Julie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say that was in amongst multiple takeaways out of that 20-minute interview. Those notions of leadership and culture that you can read all about, but hearing the story firsthand, was a real eye opener for me. And the fact that Kerryn said you got to practice it, you can't just expect it all to happen.
And how awesome was it that short just 3 months ago, they ran a full, emergency response scenario. So CEOs, mayors watching, those practice runs are just so meaningful, and you can see, how important that was to assist South Gippsland when the real event occurred, and we should all be looking at when are our sort of emergency response scenario testing, when are we going to do some of that in our individual councils?
When you're in that space and you're doing that, because I've done that before, and you're in that space where you're doing all the testing, you're all sitting back and you're going, oh, really, is this the most important thing that we can do today? You've got the day-to-day stuff in front of you, you're stressed because you've got all this other stuff that's happening, and you're spending a day in this practice and you're thinking, is this ever going to come to fruition? Are we ever going to use this? So don't question it, is what Kerryn said. Just get on, do the practice and be prepared for it, because you never know.
Absolutely.
And it's proven that it's worked. They've still got some learnings, obviously, but the good thing is that they're open to further learnings, and that'll hold them in good stead for the next time it happens.
Absolutely. And it sounded too, Julie, as though they did a debrief after the 21 event and meant it. Like really took that debrief process seriously. Can I give another plug to South Gippsland? This only came across my screen this morning. A South Gippsland Council recap where the Mayor, Councillor Claire Williams, and Councillor John Schelling sat down in a very informal way and talked through what had been discussed at the meeting, and love their work. They described it as boring. A bit of self-deprecation. That was really good. But what a good way of sort of, humanising the business of the council as well. And just a plug on the way through for people doing good posts. I've been watching Bernie O'Sullivan at Macedon Rangers and his Facebook activity, always celebrating the achievements of the organisation. I noticed they did a couple of infrastructure openings this week, and so I always love to see Bernie's work as well.
And you can see that, can't you? See this wave of excitement from the CEOs that come through, on LinkedIn of the beautiful work of their teams. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's a nice balance. I think Bernie and in fact Kerryn do their social media really well as CEOs. So you're always pleased to see that. What about we move on to something nautical but not nice, and just continuing that theme of where Chris Eddy might be. The Cook's Cottage statue was toppled during the week in the latest attack on Melbourne monuments. Julie, you're shaking your head.
Oh, I know. And there was quite a bit of publicity around this, and you sort of wonder whether the publicity is a good thing or not. Like, these people are obviously wanting to be, in the public eye and wanting to send across a message. So the news, putting focus on it, does it actually make it worse? Because they go, okay, well, let's do it again and again until we really get that message out. So this is that whole, struggle that I have with, giving them airplay. But what happened was the bronze sculpture of our British explorer at Cook's Cottage in Fitzroy Gardens in Melbourne was sawn off below the feet, and that was done on Sunday night or early hours of the morning, I believe. So now there's going to have to be a decision about from Melbourne City. I think it's Melbourne City who will have to decide on whether they replace that, what they do, how they can protect it from being vandalised again. It's one of these really emotive issues, and I think it's a really tough decision for the councils as to whether to reinstate or not. And not only that, it's just the overall cost as well of, going through. These statues are expensive. This is ratepayers' money
Public property.
public property. And so, not great. Obviously, the police are investigating the incident as they said they would, but anyway, look, will be interesting to see what the council decides to do in this space. It's a very significant site, Captain Cook's cottage. It is part of our history, and there's debates around about, whether you like it or not. It's still part of history in Australia.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of. I'd much rather see us having a debate now about what are we doing in the 21st century. That whether it's to right some wrongs or to live better as a society, rather than sort of trying to erase a bit of history. It's like, to me, sort of like pulling a page out of a history book, chopping a statue down. Do we judge an 18th century explorer by 21st century standards, or do we, as I say, rather than sort of destroy some history, let's talk about what are we doing now in terms of moving forward. But I agree for local municipalities in terms of cost. Yeah, these things are generally would be insured, but there'll be an excess, and you can bet, given what's happened in Yarra, in Port Phillip, now in City of Melbourne, at Fitzroy Gardens, you'd think that a statue of someone like Captain Cook, the insurance premium's probably gone up substantially as a result of some of these activities. So it's just I think a bit misguided.
Interesting, when the statue was toppled at St Kilda a few weeks ago, I was really impressed by the response of the Port Phillip Council, because I'm sure some of those councillors philosophically would rather not have a statue of Captain Cook on the foreshore at St Kilda, but also saw that there is a role for the council in curating its art collection, and that really can't be done by the mob. And so there's a natural sort of cost that will go with that. And that's really, as you said, Julia, quite concerning situation if we've got public art being basically influenced by vandalism. Let's move on. I've just called this Hatches, Matches and Dispatches. Comings and goings. Tony, thanks for the note during the week that we've had a new ombudsman announced.
Yes, Marlo Baragwanath, who's the current chair of IBAC, has been appointed to replace Deborah Glass at the end of this month. Deborah, of course, generally really widely respected as a fearless, at times outspoken defender of integrity. It's a really important position, this, the Victorian Ombudsman, highly relevant to the local government sector. Chris and Julie, you all know about, many reports over the years addressing local government issues by the Victorian Ombudsman. I think most recently we had around Mitchell Shire and Yarra Ranges and building permit issues last year. Also, I think Melton and IT procurement. But over the years, lots and lots of attention given both to individual councils and the sector as a whole by the Victorian Ombudsman, and that's a key appointment. And congratulations to Marlo Baragwanath and another lady who will be leading that organisation after the 30th of March.
Yeah, and Marlo comes really highly regarded within the VPS. Tony, formerly Victorian Government Solicitor, prior to that a role at the Victorian Building Authority, prior to that I think close to 10 years as Chief Counsel at WorkCover, and I know from people that have reported to Marlo that she's very highly regarded as a leader and someone of great integrity. The suspension of Councillor Susan Bissinger is something we know about, but we don't really know about because the report's not out there. Tony, I'll go to you on this one again.
Yeah, so we're relying on, I guess, the Mornington Peninsula website, which has got a bit of an update on the website indicating that Councillor Bissinger has been suspended as per an arbiter decision. for 31 days. The decision, of course, is a finding of misconduct. According to the website, it relates to, you know, some public suggestions she made about being unjustly punished by the CEO for her opinion on the intersex pride flag. We understand that the arbiter report itself will be on the council agenda today for, you know, being tabled at a meeting next week. So I'll certainly have a read of that, and we'll probably be able to give you some more detail next week, folks. The report hasn't hit the LGV website yet, hint, hint, hint. But we'll be able to talk to you and break out the implications of that arbiter decision next week.
Yeah, it seems there's a bit of subtlety in that one, Tony, so I look forward to that discussion. Julie, Alison Beckwith's been reappointed as CEO at Banyule Council for 5 years.
Yeah, great news. And that's come out recently on LinkedIn. We're all really happy for Alison. She's obviously doing a sterling job at Banyule. Really great to hear that she's been reappointed and she's continuing on the great work up at Banyule. So fantastic. Well done, Alison. You do deserve it.
And lots of accolades for Alison on LinkedIn with that appointment. Well deserved, as you say. And in other news, I see that Kelly Grigsby, the CEO of the MAV, has appointed Kath Brackett, who is the former Director Community Wellbeing at Banyule and also Brimbank, as Director Community and Sector Development at the MAV. Now, I've met Kath a couple of times. I can't say I know her well, but I do know she's thoughtful and sassy and will be a terrific appointment at the MAV. So well done to Kath and to Kelly on that appointment. Just one other one, a little bit more at the elected side. Councillor Michael Leaney of Baw Shire has been appointed as chair of the Association of Peri-Urban Councils Victoria, who do some terrific advocacy for a group of councils who need that advocacy. Julie.
Yeah, and look, I think Councillor Leaney is very, very good in that advocacy space. So from what I've seen of him, met him, you know, really good operator, and no doubt will do a terrific job to help advocate for those peri-urban councils. Yeah.
Who are not urban fringe, but actually bear a whole lot of the costs and pressures of the fringe councils.
I know, and Baw no doubt feel that, you know, on a daily basis, all of those pressures that are coming their way. So, but again, doing a sterling job of dealing with all of that.
Absolutely. I'd be saying to anyone who's wondering about it, go to the car park at Warrigal or Druin at about 7:30 in the morning and you'll get the gist.
That's correct.
Okay, moving along, a planning issue. Actually, you might both want to weigh into this one. Maryborough residents have expressed some concern about an application for a Harry Brown liquor store, saying that they've probably got quite enough liquor stores in Maryborough.
It's on a site that's a place. It sounds like the sort of place you'd frequent, the 24/7 No Limits gym. But that's what's there at the moment, and the proposal from the applicant is to put another, as you say, a liquor outlet there. The argument against being, you know, there's already a lot of liquor outlets in town in Maryborough. I guess, you know, Julie's view will be interesting as a planner. My view is sort of, you know, the way the market works with these things isn't necessarily the key planning consideration. You know, if there are too many liquor outlets, I guess one will shut down. But clearly there's some concern in the community about this proposition, not the least being the fact that, you know, there's a loss of this community gym. I think it goes to council on the 27th of February for a decision.
Julie, speaking more broadly, these are tough ones for councils where there is like a pressure for a social good, if you like, versus the right of the applicant to achieve a just planning outcome.
That's right. And the council can't control what applications come in the door. You know, anybody can put in an application for this kind of use if a planning permit is required. And in this case, obviously it is. So, you know, they can't control that, and they can only assess the application based on the relevant matters under the planning scheme. So, you know, they can't necessarily assess particularly the loss of a gym to the community from a social point of view in this situation. So really what this article is doing is pulling on the heartstrings and getting this pressure to come from the political side for the councillors to, if the councillors are making the decision on this one, to maybe overturn it based on political pressure, because there may not be enough justification to refuse the planning application. Interesting. You know, I think that these kinds of applications can often end up in that space where councils will make a judgment based on political pressure, and then they, no doubt, most of them end up in VCAT, and most of them fail to support the council in VCAT in that circumstance. But you never know what's going to happen in this situation. So the thought of a 24-hour gym for me, Steve, probably would get cabin fever, you know, stuck in a gym for 24 hours. But, you know, good on the guy for trying to get the community healthy. You know, I think that from a social point of view, I can see the point of view of the community wanting to, you know, get fit, get healthy, and you know, from a social point of view, seems like a much better option than another liquor store. But that's really just a personal opinion.
What I do at, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, folks.
Well,
really.
the gym is not necessarily anchored to that community at the moment, Chris Eddy. But we will watch that matter with interest and maybe report back after the council meeting on the deliberations there. Heading to a close now, just a couple more items. The council leaders in Scotland I presume the Council of Scottish Local Authorities, Julie, are pushing back on interference from central government.
That's right, and viewers will remember that I did a trip to Scotland last year, and I connected with COSLA, who represents the Scottish local government authorities over there. And it was interesting, they put out a statement. I've been watching what they've been doing, because they're very, very strong in their advocacy to the central government in Scotland. And they've put out this statement from all the leaders across local government in Scotland, saying that that they really don't want any interference in the democratic decision making of councils by ministers, and they're saying that it's disrespectful. So, and in particular, the leaders were clear that given the financial situation in which councils find themselves as a result of the proposed Scottish budget, reoccurring penalties in relation to setting council tax levels should not be applied. And they've asked to seek confirmation from the Scottish government that there'll be no further council tax freezes for the remainder of Parliament. So they're really, really clear. They're saying, you know, butt out central government, leave us alone, let us set our own taxes, let us get on with the job of delivering the services to the community. You know, we as leaders are united in this position, which I thought was a very, very strong message back to the central government.
Effectively, Julie, they're saying that in our sort of frame that, you know, rate capping is an assault on democracy, that, you know, the council should be able to set their own taxes and bear the brunt of that at the ballot box.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, they described it as disrespectful, you know, the Scottish government, you know, attempting to sort of step in and tell council how to set their own tax levels. Well, gee, Scottish municipalities, you'd feel pretty disrespected in Victoria if you were here, because, you know, we've got our rate capping, and but only in the last month or so, I think in December, we saw the good practice guidelines around local government rates and service charges released. And I know that in the last month, FinPro, the association representing, you know, council officers in that finance professional space, I think led by Bradley Thomas of Hepburnshire, who's the president of that. They've written to the minister for local government saying that these guidelines, which state that you know, councils can't fund waste collection anymore through, you know, service rates or charges, that you know, FinPro are absolutely really concerned about these guidelines, saying that they'll have a significant impact on the financial position of many councils. And FinPro have released publicly the advice they've received from Maddocks, it says that, you know, these are just guidelines under Section 87. They're not legally binding on council. So that'll be interesting.
Watch this space.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting. And as you said, as you've sort of both touched on, this is really, really goes to the relationship between central government and local government. So always an interesting topic. Now we're going to just looking at what we might do next week. There's been a couple of councils that have been conducting their meetings online rather than face to face. So we might have a bit of a discussion about that next week, because that raises a whole lot of really interesting ethical issues. I've got one thing I want to wrap up with and give my local council a plug. But before we do that, Julie, any last comments from today?
No.
What's ahead for the week?
Again, just a busy week. Just a shout out. You know, I've had some really great interactions with East Gippsland Shire staff and also Maribyrnong staff this week, which has been such a pleasure to work with. So just a big shout out to the teams there.
Some good folk at those councils too, Julie. Yeah. Tony.
Oh, look, just good to see that reprieve for those rural councils with the fires. I'm shooting up the country on the weekend, and we need some rain, Chris and Julie. Our water tanks are starting to empty, and I think we've got some hot weather in play again next week. So this fire risk isn't over as yet, folks, and thoughts are still out to those councils that are heavily involved in looking after the safety of the community.
Absolutely. And my last one, Tony and Julie, was my local council, Whitehorse, has really taken a couple of big steps locally around some big infrastructure builds that they've done. I got last week to go to a concert at the new facility, the Round at Nunawading, and a 600-seat theatre. It is fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And what they've also done is developed a new clubhouse at the Morak Public Golf Course, which not only is a brilliant facility with, driving range, and the mini golf's going to open soon, but there's a fabulous cafe, bar, which has just become a local meeting place. And in terms of both facilities, the things I've heard in my community is people saying, isn't it good that the council spent the money and did it properly? And so a shout out to the Mayor, Councillor Denise Massoud, to her councillor colleagues, and to Simon McMillan and Simon's team on a job well done at Whitehorse. Tony and Julie, thanks so much for joining us as we've sailed through this TGU for this week. With luck, I'll be back next week with both of you. Chris will continue on his mystery assignment, and thanks, folks. We'll see you next week.